Let's go ahead and learn how to read and write to files. This is very important because the core of our application is going to require this functionality. So in order to deal with files, we're going to need to import a library. See these things above? These are actually libraries that have been pre-written for us. And when we're using the using reserved keyword, we're actually importing the functionality of those libraries into our current class, and then we can use them. So there's actually one more library that we can use, we have access to, which is called system.io. And within this, we have a custom type, which allows us to use static classes from it in order to be able to read and write to files. Now there are actually different ways in which we can read and write to files, but in this tutorial I will be going over one main way in which you can write to files, and then two other well-known ways in which you can read from files. The reason why I'm not going over all of it is because it might actually complicate things and confuse you. But when I show you the simplest and most used ways, then you can either research the rest for yourself as needed for your specific situation, or you can just use these ones because they're perfectly fine. But once again, the reason why I don't want to show you each and every way is because it can get confusing. So let's stick to the basics and then we'll expand afterwards. So let's go ahead and learn how to write to files. I will go ahead and first initialize an array. So let me declare a string array and say lines. I will call it lines. And this is a string array, right? We know how to initialize an int array. Now this is simply a string array. And then I will, so after declaring it, I will go ahead and initialize it, and I will put the following items in it. I will say, this is the first line. Then I will say, this is the second line. And then I will say, this is the third line. Okay, so now we have some contents in our array. You might be wondering why I'm doing this, and you will see just in a minute. And then I will be using the custom type file. See? And within that, you see we have static classes that we have access to. The one that I need is called write all lines. Now there's actually a few other ones, write all text, write all bytes. Don't worry about those. Just worry about write all lines for now. And so this takes two parameters. First is the file name. You can specify the path and everything else. In this case, I will create it in the same location where my application resides. So I will simply say this, or rather my first file, and then give it the extension. In this case, I will say txt. Now the second parameter is string contents, right? Or a contents, which is a string array. What it will do is it will take that string array, and for each item in the array will represent a new line in the file. So I will do just that. I will pass in this string array, and then I will go ahead and run the program. And there you go. We've just written to a file. We created a file, then wrote into it. The way you can check it is by going to your Solution Explorer and then right click on it, your class, and then click on Open Folder in File Explorer. You will see in bin debug that now you should have a file. This is the first line, this is the second line, this is the third line. Great. So now we have written to a file. But now let's go ahead and read from the file that we just wrote. So conveniently, on the file custom type, we have another method very similar to write all lines that is called read all lines. And it takes a path. In this case, it's simply my first file.txt. And guess what it returns? You're exactly correct. It returns an array of strings. So I will say string file contents. Great. So now let's go ahead and run this. First, we will write into our file, create a file, and then write into it. And then we will read from that file. See? We just got back an array, and each item in the array is the line from the file. How great is this? And how convenient? And how simple? So, with reading, I want to actually show you another way in which you can read from a file, because when reading files that are large, you actually don't want to read the whole thing into the memory, because that might actually crash your program. So what you want to do is process the file line by line. And the way you can do that is as follows. You remember the for each loop. You can say for each, and then within that, you specify your variable, and your collection that you want to loop over is file read lines, which is another static method. And then you basically just specify the file name. So you say my first file.txt, and then you simply do something with the variable. Just like iterating over an array, you do the same thing over file read lines that is being returned. And what is returning is a list of lines. So I will simply say console write line, and within that I will just print the line. But I actually want to go ahead and step over it just to show you what's going on. So everything happened, we read the contents, you see that that worked before, but here we're going to read from it, and then we're going to print out the line. This is the first line. See? Iterating over it. And iterating over it. There you go. So all the lines have been read. As you can see in the console, they have been printed out. So this is a great way in which you can chunk out your processing if the file is too large. But these are the basics of reading and writing to files. And now you know how file handling works. Obviously, there is a lot more to it, as when it comes to handling exceptions and whatnot. But what you need to know about read all lines and write all lines is that they're actually pretty efficient at taking care of all the unused resources after you are done dealing with files. This is why I like using them. But when it comes to error handling and everything else, we will be actually going over that in the actual application that we're writing. So stay tuned.